If you're watching this, make sure to hit subscribe, because what you're about to see is one of the most shocking cases Judge Caprio has ever faced, a case that proved money can buy many things, but not dignity, not honor, and definitely not justice. It all began on a quiet Saturday morning in Providence. The kind of morning where older folks sip coffee outside small diners, kids ride bikes on the sidewalk, and the city feels almost peaceful. But peace doesn't last when entitlement walks in. And entitlement had a name. Aiden Roth, 22 years old, son of Victor Roth, one of the wealthiest hedge fund billionaires on the East Coast. The Roth family didn't just have influence, they owned half the skyline. Aiden grew up in private jets, gated mansions, supercars lined like toys. And with every dollar came a belief carved deep into his bones. Rules are for people who can't afford to break them. That belief was about to shatter. Just a few blocks from the courthouse was Carter's Diner, a small, cozy place decorated with black and white photos of soldiers, veterans, and local heroes. One of those regulars was Frank Dawson, a 68-year-old Army veteran who walked with a cane but carried a smile that could warm a room. Frank survived the Gulf War. He survived 3 surgeries. But he had no idea a spoiled billionaire's son would become the biggest fight of his life. That morning, Frank sat at his usual corner booth, sipping black coffee, flipping through an old newspaper. Aiden walked in wearing a $4,000 jacket, sunglasses still on indoors, phone glued to his ear. He didn't look around. He didn't care who was there. To him, the diner was just a place beneath his standards. He snapped his fingers at the waitress. "You. Latte. Oat milk. Extra hot. Hurry." Frank looked up and said gently, "Son, maybe try asking nicely. She's doing her best." Aiden slowly turned toward the elderly man and smirked. "Old man, mind your own business before you trip on that cane and break the rest of your bones." Gasps filled the diner. Frank didn't raise his voice, didn't insult him, didn't even stand up. He simply said, "Respect doesn't cost you anything." But entitled people hate being reminded of the values they lack. Aiden stepped closer, annoyed that someone had dared to challenge him, someone he considered irrelevant. Then it happened, the moment that changed everything. Aiden grabbed Frank's cane, ripped it from his hands, and shoved the elderly veteran so hard that he slammed into a table and fell onto the floor. Coffee spilled. Dishes crashed. Frank groaned, clutching his ribs. The whole diner froze. Aiden stood over him and said loudly, "You should have stayed quiet. People like you don't talk to people like me." People scrambled to help Frank. Someone called 911. Another recorded the entire assault. Aiden didn't panic. He laughed. As officers arrived, Aiden said, "Relax. I'll pay for whatever he broke." But that video, that arrogance, that assault on a U.S. veteran, was about to land him in front of the one judge wealth could never intimidate. Judge Frank Caprio. The courthouse buzzed with activity that Wednesday morning. Lawyers whispered hurriedly. Clerks shuffled files, and onlookers craned their necks, eager to catch a glimpse of what promised to be another viral courtroom moment. But nothing in that room could have prepared anyone for Aiden Roth. He entered, sunglasses perched confidently on his nose, his designer jacket slightly open to reveal a crisp white shirt underneath. Every step he took exuded entitlement, a young man raised to believe the world should bow at his feet. His lawyers followed dutifully, shuffling papers as if they could smooth over his arrogance with fine print. Judge Caprio, calm and observant, watched from his bench. His eyes, trained over decades, could see the audacity, the arrogance, and most importantly, the lack of respect for justice. "Good morning, Mr. Roth," Judge Caprio began. Aiden barely glanced in his direction, nodding slightly, his smirk suggesting the court was merely an obstacle to be navigated. "You're charged with assault and battery of a veteran, causing bodily harm and public disturbance. How do you plead?" Aiden shifted, crossing his arms, as if to shield himself from reality. "Your Honor," he said slowly, "it's a misunderstanding. I was provoked." He pointed toward Frank Dawson, seated nearby, with a gentle nod. "He disrespected me first." The courtroom murmured. Officer Davis, who had arrested Aiden, stood and handed the judge the report. "Your Honor, We have eyewitness testimony and security footage showing the defendant forcibly shoving the veteran, causing visible injury. The victim is an Army veteran, highly respected in the community. Aiden waved dismissively. It's an overreaction. People exaggerate. It wasn't that serious. Judge Caprio leaned forward. Not serious? A man's health was endangered, his dignity trampled. And you think this is trivial? The young man smirked. With all due respect, I grew up in a family that solves problems. Money fixes mistakes. Why can't this be solved that way? A hush fell across the room. The idea that wealth might erase accountability was exactly the lesson Judge Caprio was determined to teach. He gestured to the bailiff. Show the courtroom the security footage. The screen flickered on. Every head turned. Aiden's shove, Frank falling to the floor, the startled gasps of diners, all replayed in crystal clarity. The young man's arrogance was caught unfiltered. Judge Caprio's voice remained calm but firm. Mr. Roth, do you see the harm you caused? I didn't mean serious harm, Aiden replied, but the smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. Intent does not erase consequences, Judge Caprio said. A man who served his country, who risked his life for his community, lies on the floor because of your actions. That is serious. That is real. And justice must respond. Aiden swallowed. His confident facade was cracking. For the first time, the young man realized this was not a playground, and his money and influence might not shield him. Judge Caprio paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The entire courtroom was silent, the gravity of the moment pressing on everyone present. Mr. Roth, Judge Caprio continued, the court takes this matter very seriously. And yet, before we discuss penalties, I want to hear from the victim himself. Mr. Dawson, please stand. The veteran rose slowly, leaning on his cane. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every eye on the veteran, every ounce of respect for his service, contrasted sharply with the entitled young man before him. Frank cleared his throat. His voice, steady but filled with quiet authority, resonated through the courtroom. I don't want money. I don't want revenge. I just want respect for myself and for every soldier who has given their life, and for every person who deserves to be treated with dignity. Aiden shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, the words of a man he considered beneath him were piercingly true. Judge Caprio looked down, then back at Aiden. Mr. Roth, this courtroom is not a place for arrogance. It is a place for accountability. And you will learn today, no matter your wealth, that justice is blind. The young man's lawyers exchanged worried glances. Their confident young client was being cornered, not with insults, but with truth, dignity, and law. Aiden realizes his usual tactics won't work, but he still hasn't seen the most shocking response coming from Judge Caprio. The courtroom's tension grew thicker with every passing second. Aiden Roth, for the first time, was no longer the confident, untouchable young man who strutted into Judge Caprio's court just moments ago. His sunglasses, once a shield hiding his arrogance, now reflected the fluorescent courtroom lights like fragile armor under threat. Judge Caprio folded his hands and leaned forward, his voice calm but unyielding. Mr. Roth, you were given an opportunity to reflect on the harm caused. Instead, your actions show a clear disregard for human life and for the law itself. This is not a minor misunderstanding. This is a serious assault on someone who has devoted his life to serving his country. Aiden fidgeted in his chair, shifting the weight from one designer's shoe to the other. His mind raced. Wealth, influence, powerful connections, all of it suddenly felt irrelevant. For the first time, he realized that no amount of money could shield him from the reality of accountability. Officer Davis stepped forward again, presenting additional evidence. Your Honor, in addition to the security footage, we have eyewitness testimony from 3 bystanders, all confirming Mr. Roth's aggressive behavior. Each testified that the defendant pushed Mr. Dawson violently, without provocation. Aiden's lawyer spoke up quickly, trying to regain control. Your Honor, if I may, my client was provoked. There was a verbal altercation prior to the physical contact, and we ask that this context be considered before making any judgment. Judge Caprio's gaze swept the courtroom. Context does not excuse assault, Mr. Roth. And let me make something very clear. No amount of family status, financial wealth, or social position grants you immunity from the law. Here, the law applies equally to all, and that includes you. The young billionaire swallowed, finally removing his sunglasses. For the first time, the courtroom saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He clenched his hands on the polished oak table, as though grasping for an escape route that didn't exist. Judge Caprio paused, letting the silence press against every wall of the room. Then, almost softly, he said, "Mr. Dawson, you may address the court further." The veteran took a deep breath, steadying himself. His voice carried a mixture of authority and pain, a weight forged by years of service. "Your Honor, I do not seek punishment for Mr. Roth out of anger, but I do seek justice, not for me, but for the principle of respect. For every person who serves this country, for every civilian who deserves dignity, actions like this must not go unchallenged. I want Mr. Roth to understand that there are consequences for arrogance." Aiden shifted again, his smirk gone. He could feel the full weight of public judgment pressing down on him, and he realized that this was far bigger than a courtroom. The story, now guaranteed to go viral, would reach every corner of society. Social media, news networks, friends, family, clients. His reputation, meticulously built over years, was crumbling in real time. Judge Caprio's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Roth, I have seen many defendants attempt to hide behind wealth, privilege, and arrogance. But justice is not swayed by material success. It is guided by fairness, empathy, and the law. You assaulted a man who has given his life in service to others. You disrupted public order, and you showed no remorse when questioned by the authorities." The courtroom remained silent, hanging on every word. Even Aiden's lawyers were caught off guard by the gravity and clarity of Judge Caprio's statements. Their client, once so confident, was now visibly rattled. Judge Caprio stood slowly, the wooden gavel in his hand echoing like a heartbeat of authority. "I have reviewed the evidence, heard the witnesses, and considered the impact of your actions. Mr. Roth, your behavior requires not just correction, but reflection. You must understand that no one is above the law. Not your family, not your wealth, not even you." Aiden's pulse raced. He had been in boardrooms, commanding rooms filled with executives, journalists, and investors. He had controlled negotiations worth millions. And yet here, in a small courtroom, his usual power meant nothing. Then came the pivotal moment. Judge Caprio looked directly at him, eyes sharp and unwavering. "Mr. Roth, for the assault on Mr. Dawson, I am imposing a fine of $50,000 and 6 months in county jail. For public disturbance and the disrespect shown toward law enforcement in this court, an additional fine of $25,000 and 3 months in incarceration. And finally, for your lack of respect and arrogance, a public apology to Mr. Dawson, to be delivered in writing and read aloud in this courtroom within the next 30 days. Aiden's eyes widened. The numbers flashed like warnings. He could buy companies, cars, yachts, but justice could not be purchased here. Judge Caprio paused, letting his words resonate. "Furthermore," he continued, "this proceeding, including video footage of your assault, witness testimonies, and your behavior, will be shared with the local Veterans Association, the media, and social platforms as part of public accountability. This ensures that actions have consequences and that respect is valued above wealth and entitlement." The courtroom gasped. Aiden's mother, seated quietly, covered her mouth in disbelief. His lawyers whispered urgently, but even they knew this was unprecedented. Aiden's smirk had disappeared completely. He realized that his influence, his money, his connections, all of it was powerless against a judge whose integrity and courage were unshakable. The young man sat back in his chair, swallowed hard, and for the first time, truly understood the weight of his actions. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, signaling the court to remain calm. "Mr. Roth," he said firmly, "I hope this serves as a lesson. Power and money cannot replace human decency. Respect, humility, and accountability are the pillars of a functioning society. You will learn this, whether willingly or not." As the gavel struck once more, sealing the verdict, Aiden's mind raced. He could feel the storm outside the courtroom. The media, the online world, and every single person he had ever considered beneath him now aware of his actions. And then, as bailiffs approached to escort him, Judge Caprio added words that would echo in his mind forever. "You may leave, Mr. Roth. But remember, true power is measured by character, not cash. Will you learn this lesson before it's too late? Or will history remember your arrogance forever?" Aiden looked down at his polished shoes, his chest tight. He didn't answer. The courtroom fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. And in that silence, the world outside waited. The billionaire's son, once untouchable, was now facing consequences that no amount of money could reverse. Will Aiden Roth truly learn humility, or will his arrogance cost him everything, including the family empire his father built? The next chapter reveals a shocking twist that no one expected, and a lesson in justice that will leave the entire city talking. The bailiffs led Aiden Roth out of the courtroom, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that once commanded attention, but now sounded like the last echoes of a fading empire. Outside, the press swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, and reporters shouted questions, but Aiden's usual confidence had vanished. He glanced at the horde of journalists and then down at the street, realizing that this story would dominate headlines for weeks, perhaps months. His assistant, a nervous young man named Carter, tried to reassure him. "Sir, we can handle this. The PR team will spin it. We can control the narrative." Aiden shook his head. "No, Carter, you don't understand. This isn't a press release. This is humiliation, and it's permanent." Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, Judge Caprio sat back at his bench, reviewing the next cases with his signature calm demeanor. But even he could feel the residual tension from Aiden's trial lingering in the air. The courtroom staff exchanged knowing glances. They understood they had just witnessed something historic, not just in terms of legal precedent, but in the humbling of someone who believed themselves untouchable. Across town, Mr. Dawson, the veteran, stood quietly outside the courthouse. Reporters approached him, eager for statements. But he remained composed. "I didn't come here for attention," he said firmly. "I came here to ensure accountability. That's what justice is about." Back in the Roth mansion, Aiden sat in his private study, staring blankly at a wall of accolades, expensive artwork, and awards that had once made him feel invincible. Now, they seemed meaningless. His father, Henry Roth, entered the room. "You've learned a lesson today," Henry said carefully, his voice a mixture of disappointment and controlled anger. "One that money, power, and influence cannot buy." Aiden didn't respond. He just stared at his hands, clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. He had spent his life believing that wealth equaled immunity, that every problem could be solved with a check. Today, he had learned a brutal truth. Money could not erase public humiliation, nor could it undo moral failure. Henry continued, "The empire I built, the reputation I protected, it's all at risk if you don't change. People are watching, and history will remember arrogance more vividly than success if you continue down this path." Aiden finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, what if it's too late?" Henry's eyes softened. "It's never too late to learn humility, Aiden. But it will be too late if you continue to ignore accountability." The next morning, Judge Caprio's courtroom reopened. Aiden was back, not as a confident young heir, but as a man facing the consequences of his actions in full view of the public. Word of his trial had gone viral overnight. Clips of his arrogant gestures, the assault, and his attempt to evade responsibility were circulating on every major social platform. Social media exploded with opinions, memes, and heated debates. For the first time, Aiden realized that he could not control the narrative. The court's authority, Judge Caprio's integrity and public opinion had combined into an unstoppable force. Judge Caprio called the courtroom to order. "Today," he said, "we will continue with proceedings to determine the full scope of accountability and restitution required for Mr. Roth's actions. This is not just about punishment. It's about teaching responsibility and empathy." Aiden's lawyer interjected, "Your Honor, may we request leniency? My client is genuinely remorseful and willing to make amends." Judge Caprio's eyes locked onto Aiden, piercing yet calm. Genuine remorse is shown through actions, not words. "Mr. Roth, you have had multiple opportunities to act with humility, and yet, time after time, you chose arrogance. Today, the question remains, will you finally take responsibility, or will history remember you only for this humiliation?" Aiden's jaw tightened. For the first time, he felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. The courtroom's silence was suffocating, each tick of the clock echoing like a judgment. Officer Davis returned to testify about the aftermath of the assault. "Your Honor, Mr. Roth's actions caused Mr. Dawson not only physical harm, but emotional distress. The veteran has requested counseling services due to the trauma experienced. Additionally, bystanders were intimidated, and the restaurant staff continued to face harassment from customers and online attention." Aiden's face paled as he listened. He had thought his consequences would be limited to a fine, perhaps a slap on the wrist. Instead, the full scope of responsibility, the social, emotional, and legal impact, was being laid bare. Then came the most shocking moment of the day. Judge Caprio held up a sealed envelope addressed to Aiden. "Mr. Roth, this contains a confidential report from multiple organizations, including veteran advocacy groups and community oversight councils, detailing the potential long-term impact of your behavior. These reports will also be made public if satisfactory restitution and accountability measures are not met." Aiden's heart raced. The word public was like fire. He realized the stakes were far higher than he ever imagined. His family, his reputation, and his future were all in jeopardy. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited eagerly. Every movement, every reaction from Aiden Roth was scrutinized. The young billionaire's son, who once controlled every room he entered, now faced the public in a way he had never experienced. Powerless, accountable, and exposed. Judge Caprio, aware of the growing public attention, addressed the courtroom with a firm but fair tone. Justice is not about revenge. It is about restoration, learning, and ensuring that every citizen understands that respect and integrity are not optional, regardless of status. Aiden's lawyer attempted a final defense. "Your Honor, if I may, my client is prepared to undergo community service, attend behavioral counseling, and make a public apology." Judge Caprio raised his hand, cutting off further argument. "Mr. Roth, your actions speak louder than any words your attorneys may offer. Today, you are learning that respect cannot be bought, and arrogance will be met with accountability." Aiden finally met Judge Caprio's gaze. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition that, at this moment, the young man was facing a turning point that could define his life forever. Will Aiden Roth finally understand the true meaning of accountability, or will his arrogance trigger a chain reaction that threatens not just him, but his entire family empire? The next part reveals shocking consequences, a twist involving unexpected allies, and a courtroom revelation that will leave everyone speechless. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Aiden Roth was led back to his seat. The weight of public scrutiny pressed down on him. Cameras had captured every reaction, and social media was ablaze with outrage, speculation, and disbelief. He had entered the courthouse confident, untouchable, and arrogant. Now, he felt a cold reality seeping into his bones. Wealth could not shield him from consequences. Judge Caprio tapped his gavel, bringing the room to an abrupt silence. "Today," he began, "we will determine the full extent of restitution, accountability, and public service required of Mr. Roth. Let be clear, actions have consequences, no matter one's social standing." Aiden swallowed hard, the words echoing louder than any courtroom statement he had heard in his life. "Mr. Roth," Judge Caprio continued, "your assault on Mr. Dawson is not merely a personal offense. It is a symbol of entitlement unchecked by morality, a stark display of how arrogance can harm those who have given their lives in service. You are now accountable, not only to this courtroom, but to the public who witnessed your behavior." Aiden's lawyer attempted to interject. "Your Honor, my client is prepared to comply fully with community service and counseling programs." Judge Caprio raised his hand, silencing him. "Mr. Roth, words alone are insufficient. Actions, transparency, and restitution will determine the path forward. The court has received additional evidence from veteran advocacy groups, restaurant staff statements, and public accounts detailing the emotional and societal impact of your behavior." The young billionaire's face paled as the court clerk presented folders thick with reports. The courtroom murmured. Aiden had expected minor reprimands, a small fine perhaps. Instead, he faced a torrent of documentation exposing the far-reaching consequences of his arrogance. Officer Davis stepped forward. "Your Honor, after the assault, Mr. Roth attempted to downplay the incident, suggesting Mr. Dawson overreacted and that the consequences were unnecessary. His initial lack of remorse has caused additional distress to the victim and the community." Judge Caprio's eyes bore into Aiden. "Mr. Roth, do you finally understand the gravity of your actions?" Aiden hesitated, his usual confidence faltering. "Yes, Your Honor. I see that now." Judge Caprio nodded solemnly. "Acknowledgement is the first step. However, acknowledgement alone does not repair the damage. The next steps will ensure accountability." The courtroom screens flickered to life, revealing footage from the day of the assault. Aiden's actions were undeniable: an unprovoked shove, a harsh verbal attack, and the moment he struck the veteran. Gasps echoed through the room. The audience, journalists, and even the lawyers leaned forward, absorbing every second. Judge Caprio addressed the courtroom. "This footage is not just evidence. It is a lesson. For those who believe privilege exempts them from respect, it is a warning." Aiden felt the sting of every stare, every whispered comment. The weight of public scrutiny had transformed from abstract to painfully real. His empire, his reputation, and his sense of invincibility were all crumbling simultaneously. Then came the first of the court's mandates: community service at a local veteran rehabilitation center. Aiden would not just apologize from a distance. He would be required to work hands-on with veterans affected by trauma. Next, Judge Caprio outlined mandatory counseling sessions. Aiden's entitlement, arrogance, and lack of empathy would be addressed through intensive psychological guidance. Finally, and perhaps most devastating for Aiden, Judge Caprio ordered public disclosure of the incident. Every media outlet covering business, philanthropy, and social news would receive full documentation of Aiden's actions, as well as the court's findings. "Let this serve as a lesson," Judge Caprio said, "that wealth and privilege do not exempt anyone from accountability." In the Roth mansion, Henry Roth received the first news updates. The stock market had reacted swiftly. Shares in Roth Enterprises plummeted. Investors panicked. Board members demanded meetings. The empire, built over decades, was wobbling on the foundation of one young man's reckless behavior. Henry turned to Aiden. "Do you see now what happens when arrogance goes unchecked?" Aiden, pale and quiet, could only nod. He had learned, the hard way, that influence and money were fragile constructs when faced with morality and justice. Meanwhile, the veteran, Mr. Dawson, watched the proceedings from a nearby cafe. "I didn't seek this," he reflected. "I only sought accountability. But perhaps this is bigger than me. Perhaps this will send a message." He courtroom watched as Aiden was led to the community service site. The young billionaire, dressed in a simple uniform for the first time in his life, encountered veterans who had faced unimaginable challenges. Their stories, resilience, and dignity struck him profoundly. Humility began to take root where arrogance had once dominated. Days turned into weeks. Media coverage continued relentlessly. Social platforms analyzed every action, every apology, and every moment of community service. Aiden was no longer the untouchable heir. He was a symbol of accountability, a cautionary tale. But just as Aiden began to embrace humility, a shocking development unfolded. One morning, as he arrived at the Veterans Center, an envelope addressed to him was waiting. It bore no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Your actions have consequences beyond what you can imagine. Watch closely. The next move will determine everything. Aiden's heart raced. The message hinted at forces beyond his control, a chain reaction triggered by one day of arrogance. Could this be another public exposure, a legal threat, or something more sinister, orchestrated by those he had underestimated? Judge Caprio, who had been informed of the mysterious letter, remained calm. But even he recognized the tension it could create. The courtroom had taught the young billionaire about responsibility, but the world outside was unpredictable, and lessons could escalate in unforeseen ways. What is in the mysterious envelope? Who is watching Aiden Roth? And how far will the consequences of his arrogance extend? The next chapter reveals shocking alliances, hidden agendas, and a revelation that could destroy or redeem him entirely. Tune in because this story is far from over.